These days, studios are spending hundreds of millions on Oscar winners that can't even earn their budget back. So I went through every Best Picture winner from the last 50 years and compared their budgets to what they actually made. Kirk Douglas bought the rights to One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest for $47,000, then spent years tied up in lawsuits doing nothing with it. Finally, his son Michael came to him and said, "Let me make it." Kirk probably figured, sure, why not? What's the worst that happens? Michael Douglas took it to every studio in Hollywood. Every single one said no. He was down to United Artists as his last option, and they finally agreed to distribute it. The budget was supposed to be $2 million. Producer Saul Zaentz watched it climb higher and higher until he had to borrow money against his own record company just to finish it. They wrapped at $4.4 million. That movie nobody wanted made $163 million worldwide. It competed against Jaws and Nashville for Best Picture and won. Swept the Big Five Oscars, the second film in history to do that. Jack Nicholson won his first acting Oscar, and Michael Douglas won as producer. The script here was originally called anhedonia, the medical term for not being able to feel pleasure. It was about a 40-year-old comedian having a breakdown. Diane Keaton showed up in a few scenes. The first cut was 2 hours and 20 minutes long. Then they completely rebuilt it in editing. The subplot about the relationship with Diane Keaton's character became the main story. Everything else got cut. They renamed it Annie Hall and put it in theaters. It made $38 million on a $4 million budget. When it opened, it knocked Rocky off the top of the box office. Then it went on to beat Star Wars for Best Picture, which is still one of the wildest Oscar upsets in history. Woody Allen didn't even show up to the ceremony. He had his regular Monday night jazz gig at some bar in Manhattan, and he wasn't going to miss it for some award show. Later, he said the Oscar didn't mean anything to him. Universal had a plan for The Deer Hunter. Release it for 1 week in December, New York and LA only. Make it exclusive, build the prestige, get the Oscar buzz going. Then months later, do the wide release when everyone's desperate to see it. It worked. Made $49 million on $15 million, which isn't explosive, but it's solid. The production was a disaster, though. Roy Scheider was supposed to star. 2 weeks before filming, he quit over creative differences. Universal was furious, so they forced him to honor his contract by sticking him in Jaws 2 as punishment. They brought in De Niro as the replacement and paid him $1 million. The Deer Hunter won Best Picture. That Oscar gave Cimino unlimited power for his next film. And as we all know, he used it to make Heaven's Gate, which started at an $11 million budget and ended up costing $44 after marketing. It bankrupted United Artists and ended Cimino's career. Dustin Hoffman was going through a divorce when they offered him a movie about a guy going through a divorce. He said no. He was so heartbroken he wanted to quit movies entirely and go back to theater. They kept pushing. Al Pacino passed, Jon Voight passed, James Caan said no because he thought it would flop. Finally, Hoffman gave in and took the role. The movie cost $8 million. It made $106 million at the domestic box office and became the highest-grossing film of 1979, beat Alien, Star Trek, and Rocky II. It became such a cultural moment that a humorist Bruce Fairstein wrote a satirical book in response called Real Men Don't Eat Quiche. That book spent 55 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. The movie was competing against All That Jazz that year, which had the same number of Oscar nominations. Bob Fosse, who directed Jazz, basically conceded before the ceremony even happened. He said he was such a long shot that anyone who bet on him should get a toaster, like they give out at banks for making the investment. Robert Redford had a script about a family dealing with their son's death. He wanted to direct it as his first movie. Almost nobody thought it was worth making. Major studios passed on it. The screenwriter told Redford the characters were too simple. Even Redford's own mentor didn't see the appeal. Paramount eventually agreed to distribute it. Redford made it for $6.2 million. The movie made $90 million. That's 15 times what it cost. That same year, Martin Scorsese made Raging Bull with De Niro. Iconic boxing drama, incredible performances. Cost $18 million to make, brought back $23 million. Barely broke even. Oscar night, both movies are nominated for Best Picture. Ordinary People wins. Timothy Hutton wins Supporting Actor at 20 years old, still the youngest person to ever win that category. Raging Bull got 2 Oscars and later became considered one of the greatest films ever made. But that night, Redford's movie won and made bank while Scorsese's lost money. Hugh Hudson had never directed a movie before. His experience was commercials and documentaries. In 1981, he made a British sports drama about runners. Cost $15 million. That same year, Warren Beatty spent $32 million in 2 years making Reds. Beatty was an established director and movie star. His film made $64 million at the box office. Hudson's first movie made $59 million. He'd spent less than half what Beatty spent and almost matched him dollar for dollar. And Chariots became the highest-grossing foreign import into the U.S. at the time. A British film with no American money beating everything else from overseas. Richard Attenborough spent 18 years trying to get Gandhi made. Studios kept turning him down. He finally got creative about the financing. About a third of the budget came from the Indian government itself. The scale of what he pulled off was massive. The funeral scene used over 300,000 extras. That's still the record for the biggest crowd scene ever filmed. Whole thing cost $22 million to make. Gandhi made $128 million at the box office. The movie it beat for Best Picture was E.T. Spielberg's film had just become the highest-grossing movie of all time. It was everywhere. The whole world was obsessed with it. The Academy looked at the biggest film on the planet and gave Best Picture to the 3-hour historical drama instead. James L. Brooks came from television. He'd done successful TV work but had never directed a movie. For his first film, he made a mother-daughter drama. Cost $8 million. It made $108 million at the box office. That made it the second highest-grossing film of 1983. The only movie that made more was Return of the Jedi. Brooks had originally cast Burt Reynolds for one of the lead roles. Reynolds dropped out to star in another movie, and Brooks hired Jack Nicholson instead. Nicholson won the Oscar. Oscar night, Brooks won 3 times: Best Picture as Producer, Best Director, and Best Adapted Screenplay. He became only the second person in history to win 3 Oscars in one ceremony. This was 1984, the MTV era. Milos Forman wanted to make a 3-hour period piece about Mozart and his rival Salieri. No major studio wanted to finance it. Eventually, someone took the risk. The film cost $18 million to make. $500,000 of that budget went entirely to creating over 1,500 wigs. The movie made $52 million, but something unexpected happened after it came out. 1 month into its release, the Amadeus soundtrack hit #1 on Billboard's pop album charts. Classical music at #1, competing with contemporary pop artists. That had never happened before. The film won Best Picture, giving Forman his second Oscar almost a decade after One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. The author of Out of Africa spent her entire life refusing to sell the film rights. Orson Welles wanted to make it. David Lean, Nicholas Roeg. She said no to all of them. Then she died, and Sidney Pollack finally got to make the movie. But nothing about the production went smoothly. The weather in Africa was completely unpredictable. The shoot kept getting delayed, and there was this whole controversy over how much the actors were getting paid. The budget ballooned from $20 million to $30 million. The Oscar race in 1986 was intense. The Color Purple came in with 11 Oscar nominations, tied for the most nominations ever without winning anything. And Spielberg, who just won the Directors Guild Award, didn't even get nominated for Best Director at the Oscars. People saw that as a bad sign, and they were right. The Color Purple walked away with nothing. Meanwhile, Out of Africa had everything the Academy loved. 2 Oscar-winning actors in a romance, exotic location, biopic with beautiful cinematography. It was Oscar bait and it worked perfectly. The film made $227 million worldwide and won Best Picture. Spielberg went home empty-handed. Oliver Stone had been trying to make Platoon since the mid-70s. Nobody wanted to touch it. The Department of Defense read the script and refused to provide any military support because it showed American soldiers committing war crimes. So Stone couldn't use any military resources, which meant he had to fund the whole thing independently. That's how you end up making a war movie for $6 million in the jungles of the Philippines. Stone cut a deal with producer Dino De Laurentiis. He'd write the screenplay for Michael Cimino's Year of the Dragon for less than his normal rate if De Laurentiis would get Platoon financed. De Laurentiis agreed, but then he couldn't find a distributor. So he held the script hostage until Stone paid him back. Eventually it got made, and De Laurentiis' bet paid off massively. Platoon made $138 million. It was the third highest grossing film of 1986, only behind Top Gun and Crocodile Dundee. It outgrossed Aliens, Karate Kid Part 2, and Star Trek 4. And it won Best Picture. The Department of Defense probably wasn't thrilled. British producer Jeremy Thomas somehow convinced the Chinese government to let them film in the Forbidden City. First Western film ever allowed to shoot there. He put together $25 million in financing and hired Bernardo Bertolucci to direct. Bertolucci showed up the morning they were filming the coronation scene, and there were 19,000 extras in period costume. Actual people, not CGI. He said he was so scared he almost ran away. The film swept all 9 of its Oscar nominations, only the second film in history to win every category it was nominated for. But it made $44 million, which for a Best Picture winner was terrible. One of the least commercially successful winners of the decade. After it won Best Picture, the box office jumped 306% in one weekend, and it finally cracked the top 10. Stayed there for 6 weeks. Rain Man spent years in development hell burning through directors. Martin Brest was supposed to direct, then he left. Steven Spielberg came on for 5 months, then left to make Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade, although he regretted it later. Sidney Pollack tried, then he left too. Barry Levinson was the 4th director to take the job. 3 weeks into shooting, Dustin Hoffman wanted out. He told Levinson to get Richard Dreyfuss or somebody else because this is the worst work of my life. He ended up winning the Oscar for it. Rain Man was made for $25 million and nobody thought it was going to be a big hit. It's a low-key drama about 2 brothers on a road trip. It didn't even reach #1 on its opening weekend. Then word of mouth kicked in. Second weekend, it hit #1 and stayed there for over a month. By the end of its run, it had made $172 million domestically, highest grossing film of 1988. Add in the international gross and it hit $354 million worldwide. It became one of the most successful Best Picture winners of the decade. Nobody wanted to finance Driving Miss Daisy. Director Bruce Beresford worked for no salary because he couldn't get funding. The film had been set up at MGM, and Beresford had been promised a $1.2 million directing fee. Then the studio president left and the new regime killed the project. Warner Brothers eventually stepped in and the movie got made for $7.5 million. It got 9 Oscar nominations, more than any other film that year. But Beresford didn't get nominated for Best Director. That hadn't happened to a Best Picture winner in almost 60 years. When a film's director doesn't get nominated, it's usually a death sentence for Best Picture chances. Everyone assumed Driving Miss Daisy was done, especially with the competition that year. Born on the 4th of July, Dead Poets Society, Field of Dreams, and My Left Foot were all competing for Best Picture. It won anyway. First film since Grand Hotel in 1932 to win Best Picture without a director nomination. And on that tiny $7.5 million budget, it made $145 million worldwide. Not bad for a film nobody wanted to make. Before Dances with Wolves came out, Hollywood had a nickname for it, Kevin's Gate, a reference to Heaven's Gate, the Western that had bankrupted United Artists a decade earlier. Costner really believed in what he was doing, though, even forfeited part of his salary just to keep the production under budget at $22 million. Pauline Kael said it was made by a bland megalomaniac. Nobody expected it to be a hit. And then it made $184 million domestically, finished as the third highest-grossing film of 1990. Total worldwide was $424 million. At the Oscars, it got 12 nominations, the most in 9 years. Going into the ceremony, everyone thought it was Martin Scorsese's year. Goodfellas had won almost every major critics award, but the tide turned and Dances with Wolves swept. Goodfellas walked away with 1 Oscar. Dick freaking Tracy went home with more awards than Goodfellas that night. When Dino De Laurentiis owned the Hannibal Lecter rights, his wife said they were afraid to make the movie. He ended up lending those rights to Orion Pictures for free. Probably regretted that decision. The movie made over 14 times its budget back. Jonathan Demme made it for $19 million. Orion released it on Valentine's Day. No other Best Picture winner has come out that early in the Oscar eligibility window, before or since. It made $130 million domestically, $142 million overseas, ended up as the 5th highest-grossing film of 1991 worldwide with $273 million total. At the Oscars, it swept all 5 major categories: picture, director, actor, actress, and screenplay. Only the 3rd film ever to do that. But Oscar night was bittersweet for Orion because they'd filed for bankruptcy the December before the ceremony. They showed up to collect the industry's biggest prizes while in Chapter 11. The Oscars didn't save them. They went under anyway. Back in the 70s, David Webb Peoples, the guy who wrote Blade Runner, sent Clint Eastwood a Western screenplay. Eastwood held on to it for years, said he was waiting until he was old enough to play the part. But by the early 90s, Eastwood's career was in trouble. His previous 3 films had all bombed. The industry had written him off. So Eastwood made Unforgiven for $14 million. And it made $100 million domestically, $59 million overseas. Given what it cost, it became one of the most commercially successful Westerns of all time. At the Oscars, it got 9 nominations and won 4 of them, including Best Picture and Best Director. After 2 decades of making movies, Eastwood finally won his first Oscars. Not bad for a guy Hollywood thought was finished. Universal didn't want Spielberg to make Schindler's List. Holocaust films weren't considered profitable. They gave it a budget of just $22 million and told him to make Jurassic Park first. The 3-hour black-and-white Holocaust movie was too much of a risk. So Spielberg made the biggest blockbuster of 1993 as a warm-up act, then went and made Schindler's List. It made $96 million domestically, but Europe is where it really exploded. $225 million internationally. Total of $321 million worldwide, 4th highest-grossing film of 1993. Spielberg didn't see any of that money, though. He gave up his entire salary and all future proceeds, said any personal gains would be blood money. He used the film's profits to establish the Holocaust Survivors Foundation instead. At the Oscars, it got 12 nominations and won 7, including Best Picture and Best Director. Spielberg had been nominated for nearly 2 decades without winning. His other movie from that year, Jurassic Park, also won 3 Oscars that night. To date, Schindler's List is Spielberg's only Best Picture winner. Winston Groom wrote the novel. Paramount paid him $350,000 for the rights and gave him 3% of net profits. They never paid him another cent because apparently the film wasn't profitable. When the film swept the Oscars with 6 wins, he wasn't mentioned in a single acceptance speech. Meanwhile, Tom Hanks and director Robert Zemeckis contracted for gross receipts, not net profits. They each made $40 million. In 1996, Apollo 13 was supposed to win Best Picture. Ron Howard's space drama had already won the Writers Guild Award and the Directors Guild Award. Those are basically the 2 biggest predictors for the Oscars. Everyone assumed it was a done deal, and then Braveheart, Mel Gibson's 3-hour Scottish war epic, somehow won Best Picture. Nobody saw this coming. Braveheart didn't win a single Best Picture Precursor award. It was never the frontrunner. It didn't even get nominated for the Producers Guild Award, and it's the only Best Picture winner since 1990 to miss that nomination. The film cost $72 million to make and ended up earning $75 million in the U.S. It was the lowest-grossing Best Picture winner of the entire 90s domestically. Overseas, it did way better, though. A worldwide total was $210 million. And here's my favorite part about it. Scotland commissioned a tourism report afterward and found that the Braveheart effect brought in £15 million in tourist revenue. Which sounds great until you remember that Braveheart wasn't even filmed in Scotland. They made it in Ireland. The English Patient almost didn't exist. Originally, 20th Century Fox was financing it, but then they started fighting with the producers over casting. Fox wanted a bigger name than Kristen Scott Thomas for the female lead, someone like Demi Moore. The producers refused to budge, so Fox backed out completely. Just pulled the plug right before production was supposed to start. The cast and crew were already in Italy. They stayed there for weeks not knowing if the movie was even going to happen. Then Harvey Weinstein showed up and bought the worldwide rights for Miramax for $27.5 million. But they didn't actually have enough money to make it, so the cast and crew agreed to defer $10 million in salaries. Producer Saul Zaentz covered the rest, and they made the film for $31 million total. The English Patient got 12 Oscar nominations and won 9 of them, including Best Picture. It made $231 million worldwide, became the highest-grossing film in Miramax history. The actors eventually got a deferred payment of $5 million, more than 3 years after the movie came out. Other people were still waiting for their money. Zaentz, the producer who covered the budget shortfall, sued Miramax in 2006, claiming they owed him $20 million. That case was still unresolved when he died in 2014. The highest-grossing film Miramax ever made, and the guy who produced it went to his grave still waiting for his check. For months before Titanic came out, the press was destroying it. The production was a nightmare, the budget was out of control, and everyone was predicting a massive flop. Cameron later said the film went about 75% over budget. The final cost came in at $200 million and 6 cents. The movie cost more than the actual ship. The RMS Titanic cost $7.5 million to build in 1912, about $150 million adjusted for inflation. The movie cost $50 million more than that. After all the bad press and budget horror stories, Titanic won big at the Oscars and at the box office. It got 14 nominations, tied with All About Eve and later La La Land for most ever. Won 11 of them, tying Ben-Hur's record. Became the top-grossing Best Picture winner of all time with $1.8 billion. 1999 was supposed to be Saving Private Ryan's year. Spielberg's war epic was the frontrunner. It cost $65 million and made $482 million worldwide. The Academy loved it. But Harvey Weinstein had other plans. Miramax launched what became the most expensive Oscar campaign in history. Most studios back then spent about $1 million on their biggest contenders. Weinstein spent over $15 million on Shakespeare in Love. He sent screeners to every single Academy member so they could watch it at home. He hired dozens of publicists to target Academy voters. He threw director John Madden a huge party with Academy members invited, which actually violated Academy rules, but he did it anyway. And then he started a smear campaign against Saving Private Ryan. Weinstein's people spread rumors that the film was unnecessarily violent and that the only good part was the first 15 minutes, after which it supposedly got boring. DreamWorks, which was distributing Ryan, begged Spielberg to campaign harder and spend more money to compete with Weinstein. But Spielberg refused. He thought his film would speak for itself, said he wouldn't get in the mud with Harvey. Shakespeare cost $25 million to make. It made $289 million worldwide, almost 12 times its budget. It got 13 Oscar nominations and won 7. Saving Private Ryan got 11 nominations and won 5, but not Best Picture. After what happened with Saving Private Ryan, DreamWorks wanted revenge. So in 2000, they took a weird, dark, $15 million movie about suburban dysfunction and turned it into their Oscar candidate. They bought 38% more advertising space than Miramax did for their film. And they learned from their mistakes. Instead of releasing it in June like they did with Ryan, they put American Beauty out in September, close enough to the Oscars that there wasn't time for anyone to launch a smear campaign against it. Harvey was still trying, though. Miramax contender that year was the Cider House Rules, and Weinstein launched another huge aggressive campaign for it. But DreamWorks doubled down. They pushed Kevin Spacey everywhere, plastered LA with ads, and they had one advantage Harvey couldn't match. American Beauty was making real money at the box office while the Cider House Rules wasn't. American Beauty cost $15 million. It made $356 million worldwide. The film got 8 Oscar nominations and won 5. 3 years after the studio was founded, DreamWorks got their first Best Picture win, and it was basically out of spite. It's 2001, and Ridley Scott wants to make a Roman gladiator epic. The problem is, nobody's made one of those in decades, and the budget's going to be over $100 million. 4 different companies had to split the cost, because even studios in 2000 were too scared to carry that risk alone. And there were enough reasons to be scared. Russell Crowe got paid $5 million to play Maximus, which was a gamble. He was still coming off LA Confidential, not a $20 million per movie star yet. What's even worse, they were writing the script while they were filming. Crowe and Scott were basically improvising scene by scene. The studio bet over $100 million on a movie that didn't have a finished screenplay. Gladiator came out in May, which is way outside the usual Oscar season release window. Made $187 million domestically, $465 million worldwide, second highest grossing film of 2000, beaten only by Mission Impossible 2. Then the DVD came out and made $60 million in its first week alone. The movie got 12 Oscar nominations and won 5, including Best Picture. And that $5 million bet on Russell Crowe turned him into one of the biggest stars in the world. Ron Howard made Apollo 13 in 1995, and it looked like a lock for Best Picture. Then Howard didn't get nominated for Best Director, and the whole thing fell apart. 7 years later, he's back with A Beautiful Mind, a biopic about mathematician John Nash. The movie starts getting nominations, 8 total for the 2002 Oscars, and then rumors start spreading about Nash himself. Claims that the film left out ugly parts of his life, that he'd said and done terrible things. The Los Angeles Times later said a representative from Miramax had been the one feeding them these stories. Most of the rumors turned out to be either false or things Nash said while he was dealing with schizophrenia. It was a smear campaign. Miramax was actively trying to kill the film's Oscar chances. But this time it didn't work. A Beautiful Mind won 4 Oscars, including Best Picture, beat out Fellowship of the Ring, which had 13 nominations that year. The $58 million budget made $316 million at the box office. Howard finally got his overdue Best Picture win, and whoever at Miramax orchestrated that smear campaign just had to watch it happen. Chicago was in development hell for decades. It was supposed to star Goldie Hawn and John Travolta at one point. By the time it finally got made, Rob Marshall had to campaign just to be allowed to direct it. He wasn't even the intended choice. He basically willed the movie into existence. This was 2002, and of course musicals were not a safe bet. So Miramax kept the budget at $45 million, below even Moulin Rouge's $50 million. They released it on just 77 screens in late December and let it build slowly through Oscars season. Chicago never hit #1 at the box office, never even hit #2, peaked at #3 domestically. But it made $306 million worldwide, a 7 times return on investment. Became the highest-grossing musical in history at that time. The movie got 13 Oscar nominations and won 6, including Best Picture. Beat Gangs of New York, The Pianist, and The Two Towers. It was the first musical to win Best Picture in over 30 years, and no musical has won since. Someone decided the Academy should wait until the third Lord of the Rings film to give it Best Picture. Nobody knew who exactly. It just became this accepted thing. Everyone knew it was going to happen. New Line gave Peter Jackson $300 million to shoot all 3 films at the same time. That budget grew to $400 million by the end. Jackson later said it defied common sense, that it never should have happened, and he was right to say that, because the risk was insane. Return of the King made $1.1 billion worldwide, only the second film in history after Titanic to cross $1 billion. Got 11 Oscar nominations and won all 11. The biggest sweep in Academy history. And then, after all that success, the lawsuit started. Jackson's production company sued New Line in 2005, claiming they wouldn't even let him audit the books. The company that owned the Tolkien rights sued New Line twice. Even New Zealand actors who played extras sued to get their cut of merchandising money. New Line's CEO publicly said he'd never work with Jackson again. 2005 was supposed to be Martin Scorsese's year. He had The Aviator, this big 3-hour biopic about Howard Hughes starring DiCaprio. It had everything the Academy loves. Long overdue director, beloved movie star, film about the film industry itself. Every single box was checked. Then Clint Eastwood came out of nowhere and stole the whole thing. $1 Million Baby wasn't even shot until July, 5 months before it came out. It didn't enter the Oscar race until late December, which at the time was basically unheard of. Several studios had already rejected the project, even with Eastwood attached as director and star. Even Warner Brothers, Eastwood's home studio for decades, wouldn't agree to a $30 million budget. So Eastwood went to Lakeshore Entertainment and convinced them to put up half the money. Warner finally agreed to cover the rest. Eastwood shot the whole thing in less than 40 days. Did it so efficiently, the studio barely noticed they had an Oscar film on their hands. And because it came in so late, it avoided all the usual Oscar season controversies. It just sailed to frontrunner status without winning a single preseason award. The Aviator won 5 Oscars that night, $1 Million Baby won 4, and one of them was Best Picture. First time in over 20 years that the Best Picture winner didn't also win the most awards at the ceremony. Eastwood was 74 when he won Best Director. Still the oldest person to ever win that award. Biggest Best Picture upset in Oscar history. People are still angry about it. Paul Haggis made a movie about racism in Los Angeles on $6.5 million. Except he didn't actually have $6.5 million. When Heath Ledger dropped out of the cast, the international value of the film tanked and the budget had to be cut by $1 million. Haggis took out 3 mortgages on his own house to cover it. The cast took pay cuts and deferred their salaries. And then, while all this is happening, Haggis had a heart attack during filming and just kept going. Ignored all the medical advice and finished the movie himself rather than hand it off to someone else. After a rough cut screened at Toronto Film Festival in 2004, Lionsgate bought it for $3.5 million. The film made $98 million at the box office. Still the lowest grossing domestic Best Picture winner since The Last Emperor in 1987. And as we all know, Crash wasn't supposed to win at the Oscars. The frontrunner that year was Brokeback Mountain, Ang Lee's gay cowboy romance. When Jack Nicholson opened the envelope and said Crash, even he looked shocked. These days, people call it the worst Best Picture winner of the 21st century, despite Paul Haggis giving up everything just to get it made. After 5 losses for Best Director and seeing 5 of his films lose Best Picture, it was finally Martin Scorsese's year. By 2007, it was just ridiculous that one of Hollywood's greatest filmmakers had never won an Oscar. The Departed was his Boston crime saga, and it wasn't even originally positioned as an awards contender. Warner Brothers took a gamble and gave it a wide release in over 3,000 theaters, which was unusual for a Scorsese film at the time. It paid off. $90 million budget, $291 million at the box office. The film with the most nominations that year was Dreamgirls with 8, but Dreamgirls failed to get nominated for Best Picture. First and only time in Oscar history that the film with the most nominations wasn't even a Best Picture nominee. By 2008, the Coen brothers had been making movies for over 2 decades. They'd made Fargo, which was brilliant, got nominated for Best Picture in 1997 and lost to The English Patient, which, let's be honest, nobody remembers anymore. So the Coens had been waiting for over a decade to get another shot. And when they adapted Cormac McCarthy's No Country for Old Men, they knew this was it. That year, the movie was up against There Will Be Blood, which is funny because both films were shooting in Texas at the same time, just miles apart from each other. Both got 8 nominations. Also nominated were Atonement, Juno, and Michael Clayton. But the thing about No Country is it gave voters a chance to correct what a lot of people thought was a mistake. Fargo losing to The English Patient had bothered people for years. The Coens were 2 of the most respected filmmakers in the industry, and they still didn't have a Best Picture or Best Director win. It wasn't quite Scorsese-level overdue, but it was getting close. And this time, they'd made something that audiences and critics both loved. On a budget of $25 million, No Country made $171 million worldwide, their biggest commercial success ever. Then it made another $54 million in home video sales alone. Slumdog Millionaire almost never made it to theaters. The producers were seriously considering just releasing it straight to DVD. They didn't think people in America would watch a movie with a non-white cast. Slumdog made $378 million worldwide on a budget of just $15 million. It got 10 nominations and won 8 Oscars, more than any single film had won since. It also changed the Oscars that year. The Dark Knight, which had been this massive summer sensation, didn't even get nominated for Best Picture. People were furious. The Academy responded by expanding Best Picture to 10 nominees starting the next year. It pretty much went back to an old tradition that ended when Casablanca won. James Cameron's Avatar had just become the highest-grossing film of all time. Cameron had already won a record-tying 11 Oscars for Titanic. Everyone assumed he was about to do it again. Then his ex-wife showed up with a $15 million war movie. The Hurt Locker had premiered at Venice the year before to a muted response. It made $49 million at the box office, one of the lowest-grossing Best Picture winners in modern history. Meanwhile, Avatar was making billions. Both films got 9 nominations. You had Cameron's $237 million blockbuster, and you had Bigelow's low-budget indie. Same situation as Titanic versus LA Confidential years earlier, except this time the underdog actually won. There was one ugly piece of business, though. A Hurt Locker producer named Nicolas Chartier sent an email to Academy members directly asking them to vote against Avatar. That violated campaign rules. The Academy banned him from attending the ceremony. But the Hurt Locker still won 6 Oscars, including Best Picture and Best Director. Bigelow became the first woman to win Best Director. After the Oscar wins, the Hurt Locker's DVD sales hit $30 million, so the film ended up a financial success despite the low theatrical numbers. Tom Hooper made a movie about King George VI overcoming a stutter, cost $15 million. British period drama about a speech impediment is not a blockbuster. But the film was doing well in awards season, getting good reviews, building momentum. Then the MPAA gave it an R rating and Harvey Weinstein completely lost it. There's a scene where Colin Firth's character is doing speech therapy and he just lets loose with a bunch of F words, 5 times total. MPAA rules said that meant automatic R rating, which Weinstein saw as killing the movie's box office potential. Families wouldn't come, older audiences might skip it, the whole thing would be limited. Weinstein actually sued the MPAA over it. So they came back with a deal. Mute 3 of the 5 F words, just the audio, and they'd give it a PG-13. Colin Firth hated the idea. He said the film had integrity as it was. The scene belonged there and served a purpose. Weinstein made the change anyway. The King's speech ended up making $414 million worldwide. That's 27 times its budget. The next year, Harvey Weinstein had another small film to push, The Artist. It was a silent movie in black and white about a silent film actor whose career falls apart when talkies come around. $15 million budget. There's basically no dialogue and no big American stars. This should not have been a commercial success by any normal logic. But Harvey knew how to work an Oscar campaign. He threw a screening in Beverly Hills and got Charlie Chaplin's granddaughters to host it. He pushed hard on the nostalgia, kept pointing out that a silent film hadn't won Best Picture since 1929. The whole pitch became vote for this, and you're part of history. The campaign worked. The Artist made $44 million in the US and $88 million overseas. $133 million total. This ended up being the last Best Picture that Harvey shepherded through to a win. He'd been running this Oscar machine since the 90s, and The Artist was the final one before everything fell apart for him. The 2013 Oscar race kept changing every week. Early on, it looked like Kathryn Bigelow's Zero Dark 30 would win, her follow-up to The Hurt Locker about the hunt for bin Laden. Then people started calling it pro-torture because it showed how torturing prisoners led to finding bin Laden's location. That killed its chances at the Oscars. Lincoln seemed like the next frontrunner, but that had its own controversies. So attention shifted to Argo, Ben Affleck's movie about the CIA rescue operation during the Iran hostage crisis. It was a crowd pleaser, and it was a safe choice for the Academy. And Affleck had a perfect comeback story. He'd won an Oscar for writing Good Will Hunting back in 1997, became a huge movie star, then completely tanked with bad films and the whole tabloid Jennifer Lopez thing. By the mid-2000s, he was basically a punchline. Then he started directing and actually got good at it. When Argo became an awards contender, the narrative was ready-made. The guy who fell from grace and clawed his way back. Argo cost $44 million to make and earned $232 million worldwide. Warner Brothers spent over $50 million just on marketing, plus another $15 million on the awards push. Still made money, though. Steve McQueen adapted Solomon Northup's memoir about being enslaved. $20 million budget. That year, it was competing against a pretty strong lineup like Gravity, Dallas Buyers Club, and Wolf of Wall Street. In February, Fox Searchlight started putting up billboards that just said 2 words, "It's time." They never spelled out what that meant, but everyone understood. It's time for a Best Picture made by a black director, written by a black writer about black history. In 85 years of the Oscars, it had never happened. Some people said the film only won because of that angle. And yeah, it played a role. But it wouldn't have worked if the movie wasn't actually great. It was smart marketing, but you can't campaign your way to a win with a bad film. It made $187 million worldwide, which was surprising for something so difficult to watch. Birdman cost $18 million and made $103 million worldwide, which sounds fine until you realize it was only the 82nd highest grossing film of 2014. It made $42 million domestically. Just for comparison, that same year, The Hunger Games: Mockingjay Part 1 made $330 million in the US alone. The reason this worked financially was that tiny budget, and because of how they shot it, they couldn't do normal reshoots. If you go back and reshoot one scene, you destroy the entire continuous take illusion. So there was no running over budget on pickups and fixes later. You get it right the first time or you're done. Everyone thought Boyhood would win that year, Linklater's film that took 12 years to make. But when nominations came out, Birdman and The Grand Budapest Hotel both led with 9 each. They both won 4 Oscars, but Birdman took Best Picture. It was one of the lowest grossing Best Picture winners in decades. But with an $18 million budget, $103 million in returns worked just fine. There's something kind of sad about Spotlight's box office. This was a Best Picture winner with Michael Keaton, Mark Ruffalo, and Rachel McAdams. It exposed one of the biggest scandals in modern journalism, won the biggest award in film, and when Hollywood Reporter did the math on actual profit, it came out to about $10 million. The problem was nobody wanted to make it in the first place. The script sat on Hollywood's blacklist for 2 years. That's where good screenplays go to die. When Open Road Films finally produced it, this was their first indie that went on to win Best Picture. No major studio wanted to touch a movie about the Catholic Church sex abuse scandal. It only won 2 Oscars total, which made it the least awarded Best Picture winner in 60 years. And at the time, it was the second lowest grossing Best Picture domestically in 4 decades. La La Land had 14 nominations going into the ceremony, tied with Titanic for most ever, won 6 Oscars that night including Best Director and Best Actress. Everything was pointing to it winning Best Picture. Then Warren Beatty and Faye Dunaway walked out on stage with the wrong envelope. Here's what nobody talks about with Moonlight. Barry Jenkins made that film for $1.5 million. Adjusted for inflation, that's the cheapest Best Picture winner ever. Even cheaper than Rocky. After it won, the box office jumped 260% in one weekend. Made more post-Oscar than any Best Picture winner before it, ended at $65 million worldwide. Guillermo del Toro made a movie about a woman having sex with a fish man, and it won Best Picture. Still kind of hard to believe. He later said making it was a terrible experience because he was trying to fake a $70 million movie on a $20 million budget. Nobody believed that was possible. So Del Toro got creative. He waited until his TV show The Strain went on hiatus, then borrowed their stages and office space for free. His production designer went around grabbing set pieces that other productions were about to throw away. When they finished, the budget came in at $19.3 million. They even had $200,000 left over. People in the industry kept asking him to tell them the real budget. They thought he was lying, but he wasn't. They really did it for under $20 million and made it look like a $70 million film. The Shape of Water made $195 million worldwide, 10 times its budget. Peter Farrelly spent decades making gross-out comedies like Dumb and Dumber. Then he decided to make a civil rights movie. Green Book became a frontrunner for Best Picture while simultaneously getting destroyed. The Shirley family came out saying the movie was bullshit. Viggo Mortensen said a racial slur at a Q&A during the campaign. The whole award season was a disaster. It won Best Picture anyway. All that controversy seemed to make people more curious. After it won, the box office surged over 120%. The studio threw it on almost 1,400 extra screens to capitalize. Green Book made $322 million worldwide. Deadline calculated the actual profit at $106 million. That's a 14 times return on investment. One of the financiers was a Chinese company called Alibaba Pictures. Their stock price went up after the Oscar win. When Bong Joon-ho won the Golden Globe for Parasite, he talked about the 1-inch barrier of subtitles. Once you get over that, he said, you'll discover so many amazing films. Nobody thought a Korean film with subtitles was going to win Best Picture. But Parasite made $262 million worldwide and became the first non-English language film to ever win. The movie cost $11.4 million. Most of it takes place in a massive, beautiful house where the rich family lives. Looks completely real on screen. Bong and his team built the entire thing from scratch. They kept it secret until after the Cannes premiere because they didn't want anyone knowing it was a set. After Cannes, Bong admitted he'd been terrified someone would figure out the spaces were sets, that they'd look fake. Nobody did. The audience was completely fooled. Parasite became the highest-grossing South Korean film in history. Proved American audiences would show up for subtitles if the movie was good enough. "2021 was the COVID year. Movie theaters were shut down, the Oscars got pushed to late April, and they had to move the whole ceremony to Union Station in LA just to make it work with a reduced attendance. Chloe Zhao made Nomadland for $5 million during all this mess. She, Frances McDormand, and the producer basically lived in vans for the entire 5-month shoot. They filmed in 7 states over 4 months, and McDormand actually worked the jobs that nomadic workers do. She was harvesting beets and packaging Amazon orders through their Camper Force program. She was so convincing as a broke nomad that a Target store offered her a job application. The movie made $39 million worldwide. That's almost 8 times its budget during a year when theaters were barely open. One of the best budget-to-box office ratios for a Best Picture winner in recent history, and it happened during a pandemic. This one is a family comedy about a hearing daughter with deaf parents. It won both the Grand Jury Prize and Audience Award at Sundance, and then Apple swooped in and paid $25 million for the streaming rights. Record-breaking deal for a Sundance film. The movie made $2.2 million at the box office. Basically nothing. But Apple had already paid $25 million just for the rights, then spent another $10 million on the awards campaign alone. Their total investment to win Best Picture was probably over $35 million. It became the first streaming film to win Best Picture. Netflix has 9 Best Picture nominations since 2019 and still hasn't pulled it off. Apple did it on their first real try. Early on, the Daniels had producers telling them if they sold Everything Everywhere to Netflix, they'd get their budget immediately and wouldn't have to worry about casting. They said no, because they wanted it to be a theatrical experience. A24 backed them on that. Then Marvel came calling. Marvel Studios invited them to develop the first season of Loki for Disney+, but the Daniels were about to start shooting their own multiverse movie and turned Marvel down too. So they rejected Netflix's guaranteed money and rejected Marvel to make a $14 million indie film about the multiverse. Some say the actual budget was closer to $25 million, but either way, it was cheap. By June 2022, Everything Everywhere had beaten Hereditary to become A24's highest-grossing film ever. Then it became the first independent film released during the pandemic to cross $100 million worldwide. Made $142 million total. At the Oscars, it won 7 awards, including Best Picture, and became the first Best Picture winner in history to also win 3 acting Oscars. This movie exists because Nolan got mad at Warner Brothers over streaming. In 2021, they shifted their entire film slate to release in theaters and on HBO Max at the same time. Nolan called HBO Max the worst streaming service and left the studio. Warner panicked and tried to win him back by writing him a 7-figure check. They returned the fees he'd waived to get Tenet a theatrical release during COVID. Nolan cashed the check and then took Oppenheimer to Universal anyway. Universal gave him a deal Warner probably couldn't match. 15% of first dollar gross, meaning Nolan gets a cut of everything the movie earns before the studio even recoups its costs. Oppenheimer cost $100 million to make and earned $975 million at the box office. Became Universal's biggest non-franchise film of all time. First time in 20 years that Best Picture went to a film in the year's top 5 box office earners. Nolan finally got his Best Picture Oscar, and Warner got to watch him win it at a different studio. Sean Baker made Anora for $6 million. It's about a New York sex worker who gets a quickie Vegas marriage to a Russian oligarch's son. Won the Palme d'Or at Cannes, then started its awards campaign. The CEO of Neon said they spent $18 million on the promotional and awards campaign, 3 times what it cost to actually make the movie. Anora opened in just 6 theaters and made $90,000 per theater, best average of the year. Then it expanded slowly, peaking at 1,500 locations. The rollout was designed to keep buzz building for months. It worked like clockwork. After it won Best Picture, the box office jumped 854% in one day. Made $59 million total, which is more than Sean Baker's entire previous filmography combined. Before Anora, his biggest film was The Florida Project, which made $11 million. This one made 5 times that. Baker won 4 Oscars that night: producer, director, editor, and writer. Tied Walt Disney's 1953 record for most Oscars won by one person in a single ceremony.